Under the frost-kissed moon, a single wolf's howl shattered the silence, echoing the fracture of a heart long denied its pack. Ilara stumbled through the blinding veil of snow, her breath ragged plumes in the Arctic night. The wind clawed at her like vengeful spirits, whipping her tattered cloak against skin already numb from the cold. She was no stranger to exile. The pack had cast her out seasons ago, branding her a curse for her unyielding spirit, an Omega who dared question the Alpha's decrees. But this banishment cut deeper, a ritual death sentence whispered in the shadows of the great hall. "Leave her to the wilds," the elders had decreed, their eyes averted from the silver locket that dangled from her neck, its lunar phases glinting like a forbidden promise. It had been her mother's, a relic from the old temples where the goddess once walked among wolves, etched with crescents that seemed to pulse with hidden light. Now, it was all she had left, a cold weight against her chest, mocking her solitude. The mountains loomed like ancient sentinels, their peaks shrouded in perpetual winter, guardians of secrets buried under ice. Ilara's boots sank into drifts that swallowed her knees, each step a battle against the earth's indifference. She had always been the healer, the one who mended the broken with herbs and quiet words. But tonight, there was no salve for her own wounds. The pack's betrayal replayed in her mind. The rival Alpha's mate, heavy with child, had miscarried under suspicious circumstances, and fingers pointed to Ilara's unnatural gifts. Whispers of poison, of curses woven under the moon. They didn't care that she had saved dozens before, pulling Omegas from the brink of death in hidden glades. No, she was too defiant, too unafraid to speak against the Cullings, the brutal rites that left the weak to freeze in the wilds. "The pack survives by strength," the Alpha had growled, his voice a thunder that shook the longhouse. But strength? It felt like savagery, a blade disguised as tradition. Her hands trembled as she clutched the locket, its edges sharp against her palm. Inside, a faded lock of fur from her lost sibling, taken by the same merciless code. The cold seeped into her bones, a slow poison that blurred the line between body and frost. She collapsed against a jagged rock, the wind howling its dirge, carrying distant ewives that might have been wolves or merely the mountain's lament. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, warm for a fleeting moment before freezing into crimson ice. It stained the snow at her feet, a stark bloom against the white expanse, and she wondered if this was how the goddess marked the forsaken, with red upon purity, a reminder that life persisted even in despair. In the haze of exhaustion, memories flooded her like a thawing river. She had found the first one 2 winters past, an Omega girl, barely weaned from her mother's teat, abandoned at the border stones because her eyes held a strange silver gleam, deemed a portent of ill fortune. Ilara had hidden her in a cave lined with pine boughs, feeding her broth from scavenged roots, whispering tales of the lunar temples where Omegas were once priestesses, not sacrifices. That girl lived now, in a secret hollow with others Ilara had spirited away, a fragile revolution of the rejected, bound by oaths sworn under the moon. They called her Pathfinder, a name born of jest that had hardened into truth, for she alone knew the hidden paths through the frozen wilds, the veins of the land where the weak could thrive unseen. But tonight, the paths led only to her own end. The pack's hunters would come at dawn, ensuring no trace remained of their shame. The moon hung low, a bloated silver orb casting ethereal light over the undulating snowfields. Its glow caught the locket's facets, sending prisms dancing across her vision, illusions of warmth, of a fire she could almost feel. Ilara pressed her fingers to the metal, willing it to yield some ancient power, some sign from the divine mother who had forsaken her kin. "What is mercy?" she murmured to the emptiness, her voice lost to the gale. "If not the choice to save what others discard?" The words hung in her throat, bitter as bile. She had chosen mercy too often, and it had led her here, to this frozen grave. A shadow stirred in the periphery, not wind-sculpted, but deliberate, a flicker against the white. Ilara's heart stuttered, instincts sharpening through the numbness. Was it hunter or beast? She forced herself upright, the locket swinging like a pendulum, tolling her fragile resolve. The air grew thicker, laced with the metallic tang of blood on the breeze, mingling with her own. Far below, in the valley cradling the pack's stronghold, torches flickered like dying stars, their smoke curling toward the heavens in futile prayer. She imagined the feast halls alive with revelry, the Alpha toasting his purity, while Omegas like her bled into oblivion. But the shadow drew nearer, resolving into form, a lone figure cloaked in darkness, weaving through the drifts with predatory grace. Not her pursuers, too solitary, too haunted in its gait. Ilara's pulse thrummed, a wild rhythm echoing the moon's silent call. Fear coiled in her gut, yet beneath it, a spark of something unnameable. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first whisper of destiny uncoiling from the frost. She tightened her grip on the locket, its lunar etchings warming inexplicably against her skin, as if the goddess herself leaned in to watch. The figure halted, head lifting to scent the wind, eyes gleaming like polished steel under the moon's gaze. In that moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Snow-laden silence, the promise of blood yet to spill, and the locket's quiet pulse, binding exile to the unknown. The stranger emerged from the swirling snow like a specter forged from the mountain's own fury, his silhouette etched sharp against the moon's unyielding glow. Ilara's breath caught, a fragile thread in the wind's relentless howl, as he staggered forward, one hand pressed to his side where darkness bloomed beneath his cloak. Blood, fresh and acrid, tainted the air, mingling with the crisp bite of pine and frost, drawing her gaze to the crimson trail he left in the snow. Not a hunter from her pack, no. His bearing spoke of royalty fallen, a king stripped of his throne, his broad shoulders bowed under an invisible yoke of regret. She shrank back against the rock, the locket's chain biting into her neck as she clutched it tighter, its lunar crescents now fever-hot against her chilled skin. Instinct screamed flight, the wild's ancient wisdom urging her to vanish into the drifts before this intruder could claim her as prey. Yet curiosity rooted her, a treacherous vine twisting through the fear. Who was he? This lone wolf invading her exile? His eyes, when they met hers, steel gray and shadowed by pain, held no malice, only a hollow depth that mirrored her own shattered reflections. The moon bathed him in silver, highlighting the furrow of his brow, the scar tracing his jaw like a map of battles lost. He collapsed to one knee mere paces away, breath rasping like torn bellows, steam rising from his lips in ghostly veils. "Water," he murmured, voice gravel rough, laced with the authority of command, even in weakness. It was not a plea, but a decree softened by desperation. Ilara hesitated, her mind racing through the shadows of survival. Trust no one, the wilds had taught her. Every shadow hid teeth. But the blood pooling at his feet stirred something deeper. A healer's echo, the same compulsion that had driven her to shelter the discarded Omegas in hidden crevices of the earth. Warily, she scooped snow into her palms, letting it melt against her warmth until a few precious drops formed. She approached on silent feet, the crunch of her boots muffled by the gale, and extended her hand. He drank from her cupped fingers, his gaze never leaving hers, a spark igniting in the contact, instinctual, primal, like the pull of the moon on tides. It coursed through her veins, unwelcome and electric, awakening senses long dulled by isolation. Mate? The word flickered unbidden, a forbidden ember she stamped out with rational fury. No, she was no one's salvation, she was the forsaken, and he, whatever he was, carried the scent of peril. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, pulling back as he steadied himself, his large hand brushing hers in the exchange, a touch that lingered like frostbite, searing yet numb. His skin was fevered, calloused from sword hilts and reins, marked by the weight of crowns. Up close, she saw the insignia on his cloak's clasp, a snarling wolf encircled by thorns, emblem of the Alpha Kings from the northern realms, rulers whose edicts had spilled rivers of blood in the name of purity. A king? Here, bleeding into her snow? The irony twisted like a blade, she who had defied such tyrants, now face to face with one. "Nor you," he replied, rising with a grimace, his voice gaining strength as the color returned to his face. "The wilds claim the unwary, yet you breathe still. Why?" His eyes searched her, probing the locket that gleamed at her throat, its phases aligning with the moon overhead, as if in silent communion. Ilara turned away, denying the pull, the way his presence filled the void like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. Fear warred with that curiosity, birthing a fragile bridge between them, two exiles drawn by the night's cruel symmetry. He called himself Thorn, though she sensed the name was a veil, a fragment of truth. No titles spilled from his lips, only fragments of his flight. A betrayal in the high halls, whispers of treason from within his own council, a curse woven by a rival's hand that burned in his veins like liquid silver. "They hunt me as they hunt all threats to the order," he said, his words measured, heavy with the melancholy of one who had enforced that order too long. Guilt shadowed his tone, a king's burden for the lives culled under his watch. Omegas like her, discarded to preserve the pack's imagined strength. Ilara's heart clenched. She saw it in his eyes, the ethical fracture, the duty that had chained him to savagery until it broke him free. The wind shifted, carrying the distant bay of hounds, pursuers, perhaps his, perhaps hers, closing in from the valley's maw. Thorn's head snapped toward the sound, his body coiling like a spring despite the wound. "We cannot stay," he urged, extending a hand not in demand, but alliance. Ilara stared at it, the locket pulsing warmly now, as if the goddess urged her forward. The connection hummed between them, instinctive and denied, born of shared fear and the raw curiosity of souls adrift. She took his hand, her smaller one engulfed in his warmth, and together they plunged deeper into the storm, the snow swallowing their tracks like secrets buried in ice. As they fled, the moon watched, its light fracturing on the locket's surface, casting ethereal patterns on the blood-streaked snow. Thorn's wound wept steadily, staining her sleeve where she pressed cloth to staunch it, the metallic tang a reminder of fragility amid the epic wilds. Introspection clawed at her in the rhythm of their flight. What was this bond forming in the crucible of night? Not love, she rationalized. No, merely survival's illusion. Yet the touch lingered, a whisper of redemption in the cold as the mountains enfolded them in their ancient embrace. They crested a ridge, the world below a tapestry of shadowed pines and frozen rivers where torchlight flickered like vengeful eyes. Thorn's breath came in labored bursts, his free hand gripping a hidden dagger, ever the guardian even in defeat. Ilara felt the weight of his gaze upon her, not predatory, but appraising, as if she were the anomaly, the Omega who had not yet yielded to despair. "You carry light in that trinket," he observed softly over the wind's lament. "It suits you." She flushed, attributing it to the chill, and quickened her pace. The hound's chorus grew nearer, uvis weaving through the gale like threads of fate. In that moment, denial cracked, curiosity bloomed into tentative trust, the first fragile step toward whatever destiny the moon decreed. But the night held no promises, only the visceral pulse of blood and breath, fire of will against the encroaching frost. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm swallowed them whole, a ravenous beast of wind and ice that clawed at their cloaks as they descended into the shadowed ravine. Ilara's legs burned with the effort, each step a defiance against the deepening drifts that tugged like spectral hands. But Thorn's grip on her arm anchored her, his warmth a stark counterpoint to the encroaching freeze. Blood from his wound seeped through the makeshift bandage she'd fashioned from her cloak's hem, staining her fingers with its sticky warmth. A visceral reminder that survival demanded intimacy, even among strangers. The locket at her throat swayed with their rhythm, its silver crescents catching fractured moonlight, as if the goddess herself trailed their flight, weaving protection from the ether. They burst through a thicket of skeletal pines, branches snapping like brittle bones underfoot, until the ravine widened into a hidden cleft, a cave mouth yawning black against the cliff face, veiled by icicles that dangled like frozen fangs. Thorn pulled her inside first, his body shielding hers from the gale's final lash before following and collapsing the entrance with a cascade of snow shoveled by his boot. The world outside muffled to a distant roar, the hounds baying reduced to echoes threading through stone. In the dimness, their breaths mingled, heavy and synchronized, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, pine resin, and the copper tang of his injury. Ilara knelt beside him, her healer's instincts overriding the wariness that still coiled in her chest. The cave was a sanctuary of sorts, walls etched with ancient claw marks from beasts long extinct, a shallow alcove strewn with dry moss that whispered of forgotten winters. She peeled back the bloodied cloth, revealing the gash, deep, jagged, inflicted by claw or blade, its edges inflamed with the curse he had spoken of, veins of unnatural silver threading outward like frost veins on glass. "This isn't just a wound," she murmured, her voice a thread in the silence, tracing the anomaly with tentative fingers. It burned cold under her touch, a paradox that mirrored her own fractured life, pain that froze the soul even as it bled. Thorn watched her, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the faint glow from the locket she had unclasped to use as a makeshift lantern, its inner light pulsing softly against the cave wall. "A rival's mark," he confessed, voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of thrones toppled. "Poisoned with lunar silver, meant to unravel me from within. I was king of the northern packs, enforcer of the old laws, culling the weak to forge the strong." His words hung heavy, laced with the melancholy of a man who had worn duty like armor until it crushed him. Guilt shadowed his features, etching deeper lines around his mouth. She saw it in the way his gaze dropped, as if the cave's darkness was a confessional booth for sins unspoken. Empathy stirred unbidden in Ilara's heart, a slow thaw against her resolve. She had hated kings like him, architects of the rites that left omegas to the wilds, their bodies broken on altars of purity. Yet here he was, broken himself, his ethical core fracturing under the same merciless code. "And now?" she asked, grinding dried herbs from her pouch into a poultice, the sharp scent of willow bark cutting the metallic reek. Her hands moved with practiced grace, pressing the mixture to his side, ignoring the spark that leaped at the contact. Instinctual, denied, a bond forging in the forge of shared peril. "Now I flee the very order I upheld," he replied, wincing but holding still, his large frame tense yet yielding to her care. "Betrayed by my counsel, who whisper of my softening heart. Too much mercy for the discarded, they say. I turned a blind eye once, spared an omega from the cull. And it cost me everything." His confession spilled like blood from a fresh cut, raw and unfiltered. Outside, the wind howled its judgment, rattling loose stones, while distant weavos pierced the night, pursuers closing in, a common enemy binding them tighter than chains. She bandaged him with strips torn from her own cloak, the fabric whispering against his skin, her fingers brushing the hard plains of his chest, where old scars mapped a history of wars waged for honor. The locket lay between them on the moss, its light casting lunar shadows that danced like spirits on the walls, crescents aligning with the cave's natural fissures, as if the symbol itself wove their fates. "Mercy isn't weakness," Alara said softly, her voice gaining strength in the intimacy of the refuge. "It's the fire that tempers the blade. I've seen it, Omegas left to die, their gifts snuffed like embers. I saved them, hid them in the wild's veins, built a revolution from the rejected." The words escaped her like a vow, born of years tending the forsaken, girls with silver eyes, boys marked by weakness, all thriving in secret hollows where the moon's light reached untainted. Thorn's hand covered hers as she tied the knot, a gentle pressure that sent warmth radiating through her chilled limbs. Not possession, but alliance, empathy blooming into something deeper, a visceral tether. "Then you are the pathfinder they whisper of in the halls," he breathed, recognition dawning in his eyes, mingled with awe and regret. "The ghost who steals our sacrifices. I should have hunted you. But now, I see the truth in your light." The admission cracked the air between them, his guilt a mirror to her pain. He, who had condemned, now sought shelter in the arms of the condemned. The cave trembled as the storm peaked, snow sealing them in deeper, but safety was illusory. Footsteps crunched beyond the barrier, hunters, their scents infiltrating the air, pack from her old clan, mingled with the thorny insignia of his betrayers. Thorn rose, dagger in hand, positioning himself at the entrance, his body a bulwark. Alara joined him, clutching a shard of ice-sharpened stone, her heart pounding with the rhythm of defiance. They stood shoulder to shoulder, breaths sinking in the charged silence, the locket reclaimed and pulsing at her throat like a second heartbeat. In that vigil, the bond solidified, not love, but a profound empathy. Two wounded souls, recognizing the redemptive spark in the other. The moon's light filtered through cracks, gilding their forms in silver, while the fire of will burned against the cold. What was strength, Alara pondered in the quiet before the clash, if not choosing to protect what the world deemed unworthy? The answer thrummed in the air, heavy with ethical weight. Mercy as revolution, bond as salvation. As shadows loomed at the threshold, the night poised on the edge of blood and rebirth, the locket's glow a beacon in the gathering dark. The shadows breached the cave's fragile barrier like ink spilling across frost, the hunters' forms materializing through the snow-choked entrance, 6 in all, cloaked in the thorny pelts of Thorn's northern court, their eyes gleaming with the feral hunger of loyalty twisted to vengeance. Alara's pulse thundered in her ears, a visceral drumbeat syncing with the distant weavos that clawed at the night, as Thorn surged forward, dagger flashing silver in the locket's ethereal glow. The air thickened with the metallic reek of drawn steel and the acrid bite of their torches, flames sputtering against the damp stone like accusations hurled into the void. One lunged first, a burly sentinel with a scar-riddled face, his blade arcing toward Thorn's throat in a whistle of lethal intent. Thorn parried, the clash ringing like a tolling bell, sparks dancing in the gloom as blood, hot and immediate, splattered the cave floor from a glancing cut along his arm. Alara pressed against the wall, her shard of ice stone slick in her grip, heart fracturing under the weight of this intrusion. Her hidden sanctuary, the fragile bond they'd forged, now a battlefield of betrayal. Fear coiled in her gut, but beneath it, the locket burned against her skin, its crescents awakening with a pulse that hummed through her veins like liquid moonlight. The fight blurred into chaos, grunts and snarls echoing off the walls, the stomp of boots grinding moss to pulp, the wet tear of flesh yielding to claw. Thorn moved with the grace of a fallen monarch, his movements precise yet labored, the cursed wound sapping his strength as silver veins crept further across his torso. He felled one hunter with a thrust to the chest, crimson blooming dark against the white fur trim, but another flanked him, driving a knee into his ribs with a crack that stole his breath. Ilara's cry escaped unbidden, raw and primal, as she hurled herself forward, not as prey, but protector. Her stone shard caught the attacker's wrist, diverting the blade just enough to graze Thorn's shoulder instead of piercing deep. In that instant, the world tilted, the locket flared, its inner light erupting in a cascade of silver that bathed the cave in lunar radiance, sharper than any torch. Ilara gasped, the glow searing through her, unraveling something long dormant within, a gift buried under layers of rejection and survival's grit. Visions flooded her, not mere memories, but paths unseen, veins of the earth unfolding like a map etched in starlight. She saw the hunter's approach routes, the hidden fissures in the cave walls leading to escape tunnels long forgotten, the subtle weaknesses in their stances born of old wounds. It was no healer's touch. This was the Pathfinder's true essence, a divine inheritance from the lunar temples, where Omegas once communed with the goddess to guide the lost through realms of shadow and storm. Thorn staggered back, his eyes locking on hers amid the fray, widening with revelation as the light from the locket mirrored in his gaze. You're the light," he rasped, voice cutting through the din like a prophecy fulfilled. One hunter charged him again, but Ilara's will surged outward, instinctive and unyielding. She extended her hand, the locket's chain taut like a conduit, and whispered words she hadn't known she possessed, ancient incantations of the moon's mercy, pulling at the air itself. A rift shimmered in the cave wall, a veil of frost parting to reveal a narrow passage winding downward, its mouth exhaling the faint, welcoming warmth of geothermal springs buried deep. The hunters faltered, their snarls twisting to confusion as the silver light disoriented them, blinding in its purity. Thorn seized the moment, dispatching another with a savage twist of his dagger, blood arcing in a warm spray that steamed on the cold stone. "The key," he murmured, awe threading his pain, as he grasped Ilara's arm and pulled her toward the revealed path. All this time, the prophecies spoke of an Omega who would illuminate the throne's shadow, not to destroy, but to redeem. "You are she, the one who mends what the kings have broken." Ilara's mind reeled, the gift's manifestation a double-edged blade, ecstasy in its power, terror in its exposure. She had always known the locket held her mother's legacy, a fragment of the old ways where pathfinders wove destinies under the full moon, guiding packs through famines and wars. But to wield it now, in this crucible of blood and ice, felt like shattering her careful exile. The remaining hunters rallied, one bellowing a war cry that summoned reinforcements from the storm outside, their torches piercing the gloom like vengeful stars. Ilara focused, the locket's pulse syncing with her heartbeat, and the passage widened just enough for their escape, frost crystals crumbling like defeated foes. They plunged into the tunnel, the cave's battle fading behind as the earth swallowed their flight. The air grew heavier, laced with the mineral tang of underground rivers. The walls slick with condensation that dripped like tears from the mountain's heart. Thorn leaned on her, his weight a trusting surrender, the silver curse in his veins now flickering under the locket's lingering glow, as if her gift began to unravel it, thread by ethereal thread. "I enforced the culls," he confessed in the dimness, his breath ragged against her ear, guilt carving deeper into his voice. "Believed strength lay in sacrifice, but you've built life from the discarded. If I'm to reclaim my throne, it must be through your light, not blood." Ilara's chest tightened, the revelation stirring a philosophical storm within. Was this destiny, or merely the moon's cruel jest, binding her revolution to a king's redemption? The gift hummed in her blood, a spiritual fire against the cold doubt, but it demanded choice, freedom in hiding or alliance in the light, where mercy could crown the fallen or doom them all. Emerging into a subterranean chamber, where bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, otherworldly sheen. They collapsed against the stone, the locket cooling at her throat like a sated oracle. Above, the storm raged on, Weavos mingling with the echo of pursuit. But here, in the earth's quiet womb, Thorn's gaze held hers, a recognition that she was no longer just survivor, but the fulcrum of fates intertwined. The weight of it settled, ethical and profound. Power through compassion, or the peril of unveiling a light too bright for shadowed thrones. As distant echoes of the hunt reverberated through the stone, Ilara traced the locket's crescents, the moon's symbols whispering of trials yet to come, rebirth forged in revelation, or tragedy in its denial. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The subterranean chamber pulsed with an otherworldly hush, its bioluminescent fungi weaving a tapestry of faint blues and silvers across the damp stone, like stars fallen into the earth's forgotten veins. Ilara leaned against the cool wall, her breath steadying in the mineral-scented air, the locket's chain a light tether against her collarbone, its crescents now dim to a subtle throb, as if the goddess had expended her fury in the revelation above. Thorn sat across from her, his broad frame slumped yet unbowed, the silver curse in his veins retreating under the poultice's hold, but not erased, a lingering shadow that etched pain across his features. His eyes, steel gray and haunted, held hers in the glow, a silent plea woven with the melancholy of kings who had tasted the bitter fruit of their decrees. She traced the locket's edges, the metal still warm from its outburst, stirring memories of her mother's tales. Pathfinders who illuminated not just paths, but souls adrift in moral tempests. Yet this gift felt like a chain now, binding her to Thorn's fractured destiny, pulling her from the shadows where her revolution thrived unseen. The Omegas she had saved, fragile lives hidden in hollows and hidden springs, whispered in her mind like distant Weavos, their trust a weight heavier than the mountain overhead. "You speak of redemption," she said softly, her voice echoing off the chamber's vaults, laced with the chill of introspection. "But what of the cost? My hidden ones. They bloom in secrecy, free from kings and their wars. If I light your way, do I doom them to the light's judgment?" Thorn's hand reached out, not to claim, but to bridge the space between, his calloused fingers hovering near hers, the air between them charged with the scent of earth and faint blood. "I was blind to the culls," he confessed, his tone a gravelly lament, guilt carving deeper furrows in his brow. "Enforced them as duty, believing the pack's survival demanded sacrifice. But betrayal came from within. My advisor, Kael, the one I called brother, twisted the council against me for sparing the weak. He allies now with rival alphas from the eastern clans, hungry for my throne, preaching purity while they hoard power in blood-soaked rites." His words hung heavy, a philosophical dirge in the chamber's silence. What was strength, if not the courage to dismantle the throne built on broken backs? Ilara felt it resonate, a mirror to her own defiance, the pack that had branded her curse, the elders who whispered of her unnatural mercy as poison. The ground trembled faintly, a low rumble that stirred dust from the ceiling, like the mountain's warning growl. Distant echoes filtered through the stone, boots on ice, the sharp crack of axes hewing at frozen barriers, Weavos rising in a chorus that chilled her blood more than the subterranean draft. They had followed, relentless as the winter wind, her old pack's hunters, fused now with Kael's thorny vanguard, drawn by the locket's flare like moths to a lunar flame. Thorn rose, dagger in hand, his wound pulling a grimace, but resolve stealing his gaze. "They come for us both," he said, extending his free hand. "The past converges here in this womb of stone. Face it with me or flee alone, your choice, Pathfinder." Ilara's heart fractured under the dilemma, love's tentative ember warring with freedom's fierce call. To join him meant war, forgiveness forged in confrontation. a revolution that could topple tyrants or crush her hidden kin under the boot of reclaimed power. Freedom whispered of retreat, dissolving into the earth's paths, leaving Thorn to his shadows, but denying the bond that thrummed instinctively, the redemptive pull of two souls marked by guilt and exile. The locket warmed again, its light flickering like a heartbeat, urging her toward the ethical precipice. Compassion as weapon, or mercy as solitary flame? She took his hand, the contact electric, visceral, a pact sealed in the chamber's glow. Together, they ascended a narrow fissure her gift had revealed earlier. The walls slick with condensation that dripped like reluctant tears, the air growing sharper with the tang of surface frost. They emerged into a vast cavern amphitheater, its ceiling a jagged dome pierced by cracks where moonlight slanted in silver shafts, illuminating a frozen lake at its heart, its surface a mirror of fractured stars. Pines clung to the edges, their branches heavy with ice, and there, across the water, the confrontation materialized. 24 figures, torches blazing red against the white, led by Kale, a lithe wolf with eyes like chipped obsidian, his cloak adorned with the thorny wolf insignia, flanked by Alara's former elders and a hulking rival Alpha from the east, his pelt scarred from border skirmishes. Kale's laugh echoed, a hollow bark that shattered the silence. The fallen king and the witch Omega, he sneered, his voice carrying the venom of old alliances poisoned. Thorn, you weaken us with your pity, and you, girl, steal our offerings like a thief in the night. The pact demands purity. Your blood will cleanse this farce. The rival Alpha growled assent, his massive form rippling with muscle, claws extended as if to rend the air itself. Ilara's old packmates shifted uneasily, their eyes flickering with doubt, memories of her healings clashing with the elders' decrees, but loyalty chained them, a tragic web of fear and tradition. Thorn stepped forward, his stance a king's even in rags, the silver curse glinting faintly under his torn shirt. Purity built on graves is rot, Kale, he thundered, voice resonant with melancholic authority, the wind through the cavern amplifying it like a divine decree. I see now. The culls were your design, not duty. You betrayed not just me, but the goddess's will. Blood trickled anew from his wound, staining the ice at his feet. A symbolic offering as the locket at Alara's throat ignited once more, its light spilling across the lake in rippling waves, revealing hidden crevices where her rescued Omegas could one day find refuge. The rival lunged across the frozen surface, cracks spiderwebbing under his weight, but Alara's gift surged, a path of thinner ice unfolding in her mind, visualized in silver threads. She whispered to Thorn, guiding his steps as they evaded, the locket's glow blinding the attackers in bursts of lunar fire. Claws raked air, blades clashed in visceral symphony, steel on bone, grunts mingling with the crack of fracturing ice. Kyle circled, dagger poisoned with the same silver curse, his strike aimed at Thorn's heart, but Alara intercepted, her stone shard deflecting it, the impact jarring through her arm like thunder. In the melee, choices crystallized. Forgive Kale's treason. Unraveling the cycle with Mercy's blade, or unleash war, her light a weapon to shatter the old order? Thorn felled the rival with a precise thrust, blood blooming dark on the ice, but spared a killing blow to one of her elders, his eyes pleading understanding. Not like this, he rasped to her amid the fray, pulling her close as hunters closed in. Redemption, not vengeance. Join me in mercy, or let me face it alone. Ilara's soul teetered, the locket pulsing with spiritual fire, the cavern's winds carrying weavos of the wilds beyond, freedom's call or love's forge. Blood slicked the ice, fire from torches reflected in her eyes, and in that ethical storm, she chose alliance, forgiveness, as revolution's dawn, binding her revolution to his throne in a rebirth yet unclaimed. But as Kale rallied for the final assault, the dilemma lingered, profound and unresolved. A king's guilt against an Omega's hidden light, war's shadow yielding to compassion's fragile crown. The moon watched through the cracks, silver witness to the trial's heart-wrenching pivot. The cavern's frozen heart thundered with the clash of fates, the ice lake fracturing like a shattered vow under the weight of warring shadows. Alara's breath came in sharp, silvered bursts, the locket at her throat a blazing talisman that seared her skin with lunar fire, its crescents unraveling threads of light across the blood-slicked expanse. Thorn's form blurred in the melee beside her, his dagger a silver arc that felled another hunter. Crimson blooming vivid against the white, steaming in the chill air that carried the metallic tang of violence and the faint, acrid smoke of sputtering torches. Kyle circled them like a specter of old betrayals, his obsidian eyes narrowed to slits, the poisoned blade in his grip glinting with the same cursed silver that twisted through Thorn's veins. A mirror of the rot he had sown in the name of purity. Ilara's gift surged unbidden, a spiritual torrent born of the moon's unyielding gaze filtering through the cavern's jagged dome where wind-whipped snow sifted like divine ash. Paths unfolded in her mind's eye, not just of stone and ice, but of souls, the hidden fractures in Kale's resolve, the doubt flickering in the eyes of her former packmates, the ethical chasm yawning beneath the rival's fallen bulk. She had chosen alliance in the storm's eye, forgiveness as her blade, but now the weight of it pressed visceral, love's forge demanding sacrifice, not conquest. Enough, she whispered. The word, a command, woven into the locket's pulse, extending her hand toward the fray. The light erupted, a cascade of ethereal silver that bathed the amphitheater, blinding the hunters and halting their advance in a collective gasp, their torches guttering like dying stars. Kyle lunged through the glow, his snarl a guttural curse. Blade aimed for Thorn's exposed flank where the curse burned hottest, silver veins pulsing like trapped lightning. Time fractured. Ilara moved on instinct, her body interposing, the impact jarring through her ribs as the poisoned edge grazed her arm, drawing a line of fire that mingled her blood with his. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, but the locket flared brighter, drawing the curse into itself like a vortex, the lunar etchings absorbing the silver taint in a symphony of light and shadow. Thorn roared, a sound raw with primal fury and dawning horror, twisting to disarm Kyle with a brutal sweep, pinning him against the cracking ice. "No more graves for your purity," Thorn growled, his voice a thunder of melancholic resolve. Steel-gray eyes locking on Ilara's as her wound knit before them, the curse unraveling from his body in wisps of dissipating mist, pulled into the locket's sacred core. The hunters faltered, weapons lowering as the light revealed truths etched in frost, visions of the cull's hidden toll, Omegas thriving in Ilara's secret hollows, their silver eyes gleaming with untapped strength, a revolution blooming from the discarded like roses in eternal winter. Her former elders knelt, faces ashen with regret, the rival's corpse a stark testament to savagery's end. Kale struggled in Thorn's grip, his betrayal laid bare, the whispered pacts with eastern clans, the orchestrated miscarriages to frame the merciful, all to seize a throne stained by his ambition. Mercy is weakness. He spat, but his voice cracked, the philosophical lie crumbling under the moon's impartial witness. Ilara stepped forward, the locket cooling against her healed skin, its light now a gentle luminescence that warmed the cavern's chill, carrying the scent of thawing pine and fresh earth. Blood pooled at her feet, her own and others, a red sacrament under the silver shafts. But it no longer mocked. It sanctified. "Weakness is the chain you forged," she said, her tone intimate and poetic, laced with the tragedy of paths diverged. Introspection flooded her, years of exile, the healer's hands stained by defiance, now the fulcrum of rebirth. Thorn released Kyle, not with a killing blow, but a shove onto the ice, his ethical fracture mended in that act. No war, but a trial of compassion, inviting the betrayer to witness the revolution's dawn. Kale rose unsteadily, the fight leaching from him like color from frostbitten flesh, his eyes widening at the visions Ilara's gift sustained, her hidden ones emerging from shadowed crevices, ethereal forms of the saved, their weavos a harmonious chorus that echoed through the stone, drowning the wind's lament. Thorn turned to her, his hand finding hers in the settling hush, the contact a union forged in blood and light, instinctive yet chosen, resisted no longer. "I join you," he murmured, voice resonant with the king's melancholy transformed to purpose, guilt yielding to redemption's fire. Not as ruler, but ally, the alpha who dismantles his own throne for the light it denied. "Your revolution is mine. Mercy crowns us both." The cavern trembled one final time, ice groaning as the lake's fractures sealed under the locket's lingering glow, a symbolic rebirth where winter's bite softened to spring's whisper. Ilara felt it in her bones, the Renacimento, sacrifice of solitude for this profound tether, curing the curse not just of silver, but of souls long fractured. They stood together amid the kneeling packs, the moon's beams gilding their forms in prismatic silver, wind sighing through the dome like the goddess's benediction. Her hidden omegas materialized fully now, stepping from the paths she illuminated, their eyes meeting hers in silent vow, a family reborn, hierarchies transcended, love as proof eternal. Kyle bowed his head, the first to yield, followed by the others in a wave of ethical awakening, the old order crumbling like ancient ice under the sun. Thorn's arm encircled her waist, a gentle anchor against the visceral pulse of change, their breaths sinking in the quiet aftermath, the air alive with the scent of blood-warmed snow and possibility. What was destiny? Ilara pondered in the profound silence. If not the freedom to choose union over chains, to heal the wounded king and ignite the flame of compassion across the northern wilds. The locket rested serene, its crescents aligned with the moon overhead, a beacon of Renacimento where rejection had once reigned. As the first light of false dawn pierced the cavern, painting the bloodied ice in hues of rose and gold, the packs dispersed into the thawing world, carrying whispers of revolution on the wind. Thorn and Ilara emerged last, hand in hand, the mountains yielding their secrets, the weavos of the saved rising like a hymn to the goddess. In that union, redemption bloomed, not as reward, but as the eternal fire tempering strength from mercy's forge. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.